And now it's reached the White House. A University of Georgia student murdered by an illegal immigrant who crossed into the country along the southern border in 2022 and was let go by New York authorities after being arrested there in 2023. What President Biden and former President Donald Trump are saying today about the death of Laken Riley, and both today, by the way, also confirming they will be headed to the southern border this week. Come on in. Thanks for joining us. I'm Blake Berman, and this is The Hill on NewsNation. All right, here we go. Hanging out with us today, Chris Steyerwalt, NewsNation political editor, and, by the way, host of The Hill Sunday, which is premiering this weekend. Scott Bolden, former D.C. Democratic Party chairman. Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. And Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff, NewsNation contributor as well. Hello to you all. Happy Monday. We obviously begin with this heartbreaking story out of the state of Georgia on the campus of the University of Georgia, where today, as they have been for the last couple of days, students there mourning the death of one of their classmates, the loss of Laken Riley. Watch.
Laken, a caring, driven sister who taught us what a true friend is. Although the flowers in our house will fade, the visitors will slow, and we will begin classes again, our hearts will always ache without Laken, who was such an integral part of our sisterhood.
Statement from President Biden from the White House today, quote, "We would like to extend our deepest condolences to the family and loved ones of Laken Riley. People should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law if they are found to be guilty," end quote. Donald Trump, the former president, current Republican frontrunner, saying this, quote, "Crooked Joe Biden's border invasion is destroying our country and killing our citizens. The horrible murder of 22-year-old Laken Riley at the University of Georgia should never have happened," end quote. Chris, it's reached now to the level of President Biden and Donald Trump weighing in.
Yeah, and, you know, all murders are heartbreaking, right? There are no unsad murders, and obviously, when you have a murder that crosses over into this highly politicized, highly charged space, people are going to try to take advantage of it. And we saw how Donald Trump used the term that they use are the angel families. The phrase they coined for families of people who were killed by illegal immigrants. Yep. It is effective messaging, and it does, whether it's cynical or not, it is effective, and it certainly puts Joe Biden on the defense.
What do you make of both the White House and the campaign today putting out statements?
They got to say something, right? But they haven't addressed the elephant in the room, which is the border policies. And again, Chris is absolutely right. I hate to almost talk politics about this because it's such a tremendous personal loss for this family. But that's what we do on this show. We talk politics, right? This is tough. This was foreseeable. Okay, how many times have we've seen people on this show talk about, well, there hasn't been a terrorist attack yet with anybody who's come across the southern border, or there hasn't been a high-profile murder yet. These things are going to happen if you let enough people in the country. It's just it's math, right? And it's got a tough place right now for the White House to be there tonight.
Yeah, but Mick, let's not talk about this, because I agree with you, but let's not talk about this in terms of Republicans against Democrats and it being the Democrats' fault, because if there's going to be blood on anybody's hands, it's blood on all the Democrats and the Republicans' hands, because Biden's first bill to the House of Representatives and the Senate was a border bill. And if you look at how both parties have conducted themselves, whether you agree with one or the other, they both failed the American people in shutting down this border. Biden, because he's moved kind of slow. Republicans, because they had a joint bill or a bipartisan bill, and they've rejected it. They played politics and linked it to Ukraine and Jewish funding and what have you. And so this is nothing but politics. And so the rhetoric is offensive and disappointing, because we've got a dead young woman who should be alive, whether it was an illegal immigrant that killed her or some random person killing her. It's still a tragedy.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, here's what he said earlier today. Watch. He said, quote, "This is what we feared would happen because we have 8.5 million people that have come into the country illegally." Kelly.
I was actually just going to mention that because it's twofold. You know, obviously you want to keep the focus on this terrible thing that happened to this girl as she was just running on campus, and the Georgia governor saying that his own daughter goes there, his own daughter goes on that same trail and works out. So it's so sad. But then he also says the family is angry and wants answers. So they're also looking for a solution here, and then it becomes political with looking at how this happened, who was responsible, and what they do from here. All
right, joining us now is the congressman from that district, from Athens, Georgia, Congressman Mike Collins. He represents, as I mentioned, that area in and around the University of Georgia. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Terribly sad for your community and for those who know Lakin. I'm wondering, as you sit here and you try to figure out the way forward and what's next, who you've talked to in Washington about this and what you've heard.
Well, this is a gut-wrenching situation. It's something that shouldn't have ever happened. What we have is illegals crossing this border, our southern border, at record pace, and they are moving into these sanctuary cities, and they're conducting crimes, and then once they get caught, instead of turning them over to ICE, they're moving on to other sanctuary cities, which is what happened in this case. I mean, this guy just got arrested for shoplifting, but nothing was done to him. And this is the type of things that we have got to stop, and the Biden administration could stop this in 5 minutes. Joe Biden has the necessary means to do that. But when he came into office, the first thing he did was just totally anything that President Trump did as far as executive orders, he reversed them. And that included that southern border down there. And we were just down there 3 weeks ago. And Blake, I'm going to tell you, the section that we were at in Arizona is where criminals cross that border every day, all day. And we had a hearing, and I was sitting there looking across the room at families, and those families were worried. They were worried about their lives, their kids, their grandkids, because the people that are pouring across that border down there are not here to become good citizens.
You just talked about sanctuary cities and then also name-check Donald Trump and the Biden administration. So let me ask you about both. State Senator Jason Estevez, a Democrat in your state locally. Here's what he said. He said, quote, Lakin Riley's family deserves space to grieve without being used for cheap political points. Those who bring up border security should take that up with Trump, who recently whipped Republicans in D.C. into shelving a bipartisan border security bill. What would you say to him?
Well, first of all, that was not a border security bill and not anywhere near it. But let me ask you this. We passed H.R. 2 290 plus days ago. It's been sitting in the Senate. Now, if the Senate was serious about anything, which they're not, they don't take up anything that we send over there. They use everything and every opportunity as a political pawn, just like they did this one. They could have taken up H.R. 2. I haven't seen them mark it up. I don't think anybody has. Mark it up, vote on it, vote it down, vote it up, put it into conference. We know that there are some places you can compromise a little bit on, but this was a pure border bill to fix that border down there, and they have not touched it. So you cannot come in here saying that we didn't have a bipartisan or any effort to fix that border.
And you mentioned sanctuary cities, Congressman. Athens, that area, that county, Clark County, the Clark County Sheriff Ira Edwards, back in 2018, that was 5-6 years ago, declared that area would be a sanctuary city. What's the state got to do about it? Because, Republicans, you've got a Republican governor, Republicans in the House and the Senate. I would think if you want to do something about that area being a sanctuary city, potentially you could. Is there anything you could do about it, and what might that be?
Sure there is. And I know that the state legislature is working on that hard today, and they should have some bills out this week that I know they're pushing through the rules committees as we speak. And Georgia, it's illegal to have sanctuary cities. The problem is we don't put enough teeth into the bills that we have passed. So they need to go back in there and make sure that there are true penalties when these local law enforcement agencies are not reporting these illegal aliens when they come in and they commit crimes. That's the first thing they need to do here in Georgia.
Congressman Collins, we got to leave it there, but thank you for the time. Again, terribly sad story down there in Athens, which we continue to follow here on NewsNation and on the Hill. Appreciate it. All right. Well, as we mentioned, both President Biden and Donald Trump are both going to the southern border on Thursday, just a few days' time. The president is traveling to Brownsville, Texas, where he will meet with Border Patrol agents, law enforcement, and local leaders. The president is expected to push the House to pass the bipartisan border bill, which also includes funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Donald Trump, on the other hand, who urged lawmakers to kill the bill, will visit Eagle Pass, Texas. Same day, by the way, same border, essentially. In his remarks, he is planning to hit the president over the administration's handling of the border. All right. So you've got Trump, you've got Biden down there on the same day, on the same issue. What do you expect?
You know, when you were talking to the congressman, it really encapsulated, it really summed up why we are such a basket case on immigration and border policy. We don't have a coherent border policy and haven't for a long time. We don't have a coherent immigration policy because it is not in the perceived advantage of either party to fix it. And the message that we send to the world continually is that the United States is schizophrenic on its border policies. We are inconsistent. We are a mess. And as long as the rule is not, I'm going to get a policy in place, but that it has to inflict political pain on my opponents. Mm-hmm. It's that if it's not enough just to get what you want, but you also have to punish your political opposition, then nothing's going to happen. You ask the congressman, well, what about the bill? And he said, well, it's not our fault. It's their fault. They didn't do it first.
And then in the state of Georgia, locally, again, a red state, that's been a sanctuary city for 5-6 years. He says they're going to try to make fixes and changes and the like, but to your point, it's national, it's at the state level as well.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go on.
I was just going to answer your question. I feel like them both going here, also start of the general election, which we saw this weekend with the signs, fire Biden at the South Carolina primary. So moving into that, all political, but then also to touch on Chris's point, how just obviously hypocritical, and I know we're in Washington and not, that's not used to anybody.
You're allowed.
Let it rip while you're up here, Kelly.
But just the Republicans are saying we want a border bill. Democrats say here's a border bill. Then it doesn't get done. But then Biden also saying on the other side, I can't do anymore. Now he's weighing executive action at the border potentially, but our sources saying he's not going to do that this week.
But that proves Chris's point. I offer a friendly amendment to you. How about do something? Right? Instead of talking and policy, let's do something. Right now, Biden has the power to do something, right? I don't know why it's taking him so long.
Well,
even the visuals.
No, wait a minute. No, it will be Democrats who decide whether or not Joe Biden has a free hand to deal with this both as a political and a practical problem.
Yeah, but I put it on both the Democrats, the Republicans in the House and the Senate and Biden to do something. Biden can do the executive actions. I don't know why it's taking so long.
Will Democrats stick with it?
He's probably
they got to do something, or they risk losing this election because this issue's not going away.
As Mick knows, Biden's probably setting up any executive actions or orders for the State of the Union or right before it. But I wonder. What do you know him as well as anyone? What do you expect out of Donald Trump on Thursday?
It doesn't make any difference. Okay. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but I thought you were going someplace else in that video we just saw, because while the congressman was talking, there was video playing on the television screen. And what I saw, because I've heard all the chatter, right? I know what the Democrats are going to say. I know what the Republicans are going to say. The video was captivating. The video showed people in uniform helping illegal immigrants through the razor wire. Okay, that's the type of thing that cuts through whatever the congressman said, whatever the president's going to say on the State of the Union. That ordinary people look at that and go, I don't know if I like Trump. I don't know if I like Biden. I don't like that. And I'm going to change leadership because of it. That's what I saw in that.
But the other thing you saw in the video during that interview was that Biden was standing there with Border Patrol officials, right, near a wall that Donald Trump built, right, and a wall that has not stopped illegal immigration, which is what we were promised by the Trump administration.
And then you saw Trump standing in front of a wall that was partially completed, that he wants to finish in his second term.
And wasn't there new polling saying that more people want the wall as well?
Well, I mean, you gotta take it all into account, obviously, where these two are and where this is going forward. But it'll be fascinating to see those two basically a few hundred miles apart from each other on Thursday. All right, coming up here on The Hill, Hot Mike with Mick, his thoughts on the big White House meeting that is set to take place tomorrow and what he's hearing about the future of Nikki Haley's campaign. You hearing some things, Mick?
Indeed.
You are. Okay, Hot Mike with Mick coming up. And Chris said earlier today, Chris was like, I want to talk about llamas. You want to talk about llamas?
I love a llama.
I love llama.
Why does Chris want to talk about that llama right there, and what on earth does it have to do with the Supreme Court?
Cuidado.
Cuidado. Steyerwalt breaks it down on the other side of the break when The Hill on NewsNation returns. Stay with us.
A pack of your bags.
All right, welcome back. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments over 2 social media laws in the states of Florida and Texas that sought to bar the major social media companies from making editorial judgments. Those companies argued today that the laws violate the First Amendment. Now, the court's decision is expected by June. So what are we supposed to make of a lot of the noise that is surrounding this case? Steyerwalt here to break it all down. Chris?
Oh, I didn't know I was going to have to be that good. Okay, well, we'll try. On this day in 2015, 2 llamas, Kanitka and Laney, escaped on a visit to an assisted living facility outside of Phoenix, Arizona. For 3 magnificent hours that afternoon, the renegade llamas, tracked by news helicopters overhead, delighted the nation as they evaded law enforcement and animal control, darting in and out of traffic and generally being hilarious. Before some cowboys finally lassoed them. That's right, America. It's the llama-versary. Kaknita and Laney became instant celebrities, spawning a tsunami of social media content and the kind of roadblock television coverage usually reserved for natural disasters and tragedies. So what does a goofy news story from 9 years ago have to do with us? Well, that year, the percentage of American adults on social media hit 65%, up from 7% when the technologies broke through a decade before. The llamas proved the power of users on platforms like Twitter, now called X, to drive news coverage and the national discussion. It was a fluffy preview of something much less tame. The 2016 presidential election, the first one entirely in the connected age, unleashed a toxic stream of hate, anger, disinformation, and lies. We can blame Russian or Chinese meddling for some, but if we're being honest, we know that Americans didn't need much encouragement to tear each other apart. And we in the news business amplified that problem. We're chasing clicks and rage revenue by following social media mobs into the darkest corners of political life. Instead of trying to lead audiences to the truth, too many journalists were following the herd. 2 close elections and a pandemic later, it turned out to be a surprisingly short trip from a couple of leaping llamas to rage and riots. Less surprising is that Americans tuned out. In 2016, 51% of U.S. adults said they followed the news all or most of the time. Now that number is much, much lower across every age and demographic group. Burned out by mob-fueled outrage, they tuned out, and I don't blame them. Maybe now we know a little better. What looked like massive movements online were really driven by fanatical groups of super users. The top 10% of Twitter users were generating 92% of posts. Social media can be good or bad, like any tool, but it's not real life. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments about state laws that try to put governments in charge of policing political speech. The measures in question smack of the kind of pandering to addicted online audiences that took the U.S. from the lovable hijinks of some llamas to a violent flash mob storming the U.S. Capitol. Technologically and constitutionally obtuse, the laws seem unlikely to stand anyway. The better remedy would be that this election year, we in the press show what we've learned. Number 1, the same human nature that has afflicted us for 10,000 years is no less and no more present in the digital age than it was before. Technology changed how we communicate, but not who we are. Number 2, intensity is not the same as popular sentiment. In a country with 161 million registered voters, a social media firestorm among a self-selected group of obsessive tells us very little about what normal people think. And number 3, the news media is every bit as much villain as victim in the story of social media radicalizing politics. We have the power as individuals and institutions to choose how we use these tools. Maybe more journalists can show our independence and judgment and start to reverse that long slide in news consumption by offering you our best instead of chasing the worst. And maybe, if you will forgive me, more llamas, less dramas.
Steyerwalt breaks it down. Wow. I told you he wanted to talk about llamas.
Is that what the Sunday show is going to be like?
I hope so. What's the Sunday show going to be like?
Fantastic.
We need more of that.
Llama content, llama-facing content. I don't know what sort of petting zoo we're going to have in here to get people to watch it, but I'll do what it takes.
All right. Hey,
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you real quick, what do we expect out of the Supreme Court here with this decision?
I don't think you can prove a negative, and so I don't think they're going to do anything in connection to changing how these states can regulate these social media companies. Chris, I think you're right, but it's a thin line between chasing the positive and going with the herd and the negative, because you're in the media is in the business of covering what's going on, whether it's online or otherwise.
Totally, and these are prudential tests, right? For us as journalists, What we have to try to do is use our best judgment and use our experience to come to terms. But what was happening 10 years ago was social media was new and it blew our circuit boards, right? We were like, oh my gosh, look at this. That tweet's got 30,000 retweets. Right. Well, when you only have as many people as would go to a high school football game engaging with something, it looks really big when it's right here on your phone. Right. But again, in a country with 161 million registered voters, it's not that much.
It's minute.
All right. Still much more ahead here on the Hill. Do you shop at Kroger? Do you shop at Albertsons? If you do, the Biden administration today, you might want to listen up. The Biden administration dropped some news about the possible future of your grocery store, what they said and what it could mean for your community. Plus, did you hear the warning from the nation's top banker, Jamie Dimon, from earlier today as well? Why he is in the camp that the economy might not have a soft landing. We'll show you what he said. And Donald Trump officially appealing his nearly $500 million judgment today. On the other side of the break, we're talking to the woman who set up a GoFundMe account for the former president. We're following the money. Hot Mic with Mick as well. On the Hill on NewsNation returns. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. So President Biden just 10 days away from the next State of the Union address. The Federal Trade Commission, by the way, to date, in advance of that, might be giving him a new talking point, potentially. The FTC is suing to block what would be the largest supermarket merger in U.S. history. That's between Kroger and Albertsons. The director of the FTC's Bureau of Competition saying, quote, it would lead to additional grocery price hikes for everyday goods, further exacerbating the financial strain consumers across the country face today, end quote. Meantime, did you see this? The nation's top banker is warning that he's not as optimistic about the economy as the markets are. Here was Jamie Dimon earlier today. Watch.
So when people talk about, the market is kind of pricing a soft landing, that may very well happen, but, the odds at 70 or 80%, I would give them half of that, that's all. We may very well have one, but I think there was also a higher chance in the market things of rates being a little bit higher.
So, Mick, Jamie Dimon says if the markets are pricing in a 75% or chance of there being a soft landing, meaning no recession, right? He's at half of that, which is pricing in maybe a 2/3% chance that there could be some form of a recession. Is he right there?
Yeah, listen, this is prognostication of the markets, right? If you knew he was right, you could make a lot of money later on.
We wouldn't be here. We'd be on the yacht in the Mediterranean.
That's exactly right. I think what he's saying is, look, the numbers are all over the place. They just are. The inflation numbers are still sticking around. There was some new inflation data out just last week that it's still hotter than the Federal Reserve wants. But you weigh that against the Federal Reserve's inability to raise their rates. They can't raise rates back like they did in the 1970s to beat inflation because we couldn't afford interest rates at 16% right now. The federal government would go broke. So there's sort of this strange area where inflation is still hot, but the Fed can't really raise rates. In fact, they're talking about lowering rates. The data is all over the board right now, and that's why I think you're getting a variety of opinions on what comes down in the next 6 to 9 months.
If this happens, if he's right, that ain't good for your guy.
It ain't happening. 2 years ago, they were prognosticating that we were going to be in a recession and inflation was going to be twice as high.
So inflation was transitory for a while, too.
Yeah, that's true, too. I can see that. So they've all been wrong all over the place. I think the big deal here is Jamie Dimon. When people hear Jamie Dimon, they listen to him. Yeah. And he's also in that interview start talking about, I know you're going to talk about this, talking about the merger between these credit card companies.
So Discover and Capital One.
Exactly.
And Democrats are already saying no. So we saw the Biden administration say, let's block this supermarket deal. Yep. Now there's a possible conglomerate credit card deal. Here was Jamie Dimon on that, too. Watch.
I think companies should be allowed to do and innovate and grow and merge and try to challenge things. I think that's good. So I think it's a mistake to act like it's bad. It's good for competition. In fact, I think they should allow some of these smaller banks to merge. If that's how they think they can best compete with JP Morgan, you should let them. It may not work in every case, but you shouldn't predetermine that. You should let the market predetermine that.
And you got Democrats coming out today basically pushing back on this idea of a merger.
Democrats hate mergers.
I know, and that's why I bring up the Kroger thing.
And Republicans
let them compete. Do they really? Okay.
Yeah, Josh Hawley and the other sort of
they hate everything.
Populist. They're against it. This is a story about Joe Biden paying a price for appeasing his left wing in the early going of his administration. He appointed a woman named Lena Khan to run the FTC. And Lena Khan is an enthusiastic radical. She's an Elizabeth Warren. She's a very, very, I'm sure, the youngest person to ever lead the FTC. And she brings this super aggressive approach. Here's the problem. That merger, that grocery store merger, the argument that it would raise prices is that it would raise prices in the long term. What would it do to food prices in the short term? Bring them down. It would bring short-term food prices down, which is something Joe Biden would like. What would the credit card? We had the points guy on.
They said it's good for consumers.
What would that do in the short term for consumers? It would help consumers. Joe Biden would like both of those things to happen this year, but Lena Khan has a different opinion.
All right. Meantime, today, former President Trump appealed the New York civil fraud trial judgment against him, nearly $500 million, $454 million, but Trump may not have to pay it all alone, potentially. Elena Cardone is the CEO of Build an Empire and the wife of the famous investor Grant Cardone. She set up a GoFundMe for Trump's legal fees. As you can see there, she's raised about $1.2 million and joins us live. Elena, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate the time. Real quick, tell us, what are you trying to do here?
I'm trying to send a message both to President Trump that, if you get messed with, you have an ally of forces of people behind you saying this is not okay, and a message to the government for an extreme overreach by the essence of the word of what has been done here to our president. Essentially putting sanctions on our president is just mind-boggling to me. So I really wanted to send a message, and I just went full-blown out and set up a GoFundMe at the spur of the moment.
$1.25 million, 22,000 donations. I did a little back-of-the-envelope math. That's $56 per. You got a long way to go. I know you're saying you're trying to send a message.
Yes, definitely trying to send a message. This has been done, and I guess we're on day 9 or 10 at this point. So it's definitely getting a lot of attention, in both aspects. I have entrepreneurs and property owners that are reaching out to us. We have large investments here in the South East region. We pulled immediately when this verdict was read. We stopped all opportunities in New York, Chicago, and California because this was just very shocking, and every single American should be concerned by this verdict.
Are you making any money off the GoFundMe, and what have you done with the businesses, with the family, and New York as a result?
Say that again?
I said, are you making any money off the GoFundMe, and separately, what have you done with the family businesses or enterprise in New York? Are you stop investing there at all?
Oh, we pulled out. We've advised all of our investors that they should also cease doing business with New York. It's not a safe place to do business at this time. We pulled out all of our future events there. We will not be going to New York until matters resolve. To answer your other question, no, I am not personally going to be getting any money personally from this GoFundMe account. This is going to be set up into a trust that can either pay for his civil legal defense, appeal, the bond. So the lawyers are working now, but yeah, this is totally legal, and we are in coordination to facilitate it. People have tried to shut this GoFundMe down. They tried to shut it down hard, but we are operating in the legal bounds and guidelines. So we're ready to keep on going. And I'd like to turn it over to President Trump with a big old handshake and salute and say, hey, you have an army of people standing by your side.
Elena Cardone, we'll leave it there, and thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a great day. Meantime, by the way, did you see this from over the weekend? Argentina's president, Javier Milei, former President Donald Trump, having a bit of a friendly meeting there. I couldn't even make the read before Mick started laughing.
Oh, you have no idea.
This was at CPAC. The two speaking with one another over the weekend. What brings you to to dead laughter.
The hair alone.
The hair alone. Look at the hair.
You have
They're taking tips from each other, I think.
Taking tips from
you have no idea how much Trump is hating that.
Why? Why do you say
The
that?
man is not a hugger. He's not a toucher. I remember one time we had at Howdy Modi down in Houston, Texas, and we negotiated how exactly long we were going to stand on stage. Modi from India was there, and unannounced at the end, Modi comes up, grabs him on stage by the hand, and they walk the entire floor of the arena, 80,000 screaming Indian Americans.
No touching.
And Trump's not a toucher. So I'm watching this going, oh my goodness gracious.
He's holding him pretty long, though. He's holding him.
Hold me closer, tiny dancer. Yes.
That's, wow. Okay.
Coming up, Mulvaney knows what it's like to be in the room with the president and top congressional leaders. So what should we expect ahead of tomorrow's big showdown at the White House? This is the Big Four and the president. And what's the game plan for Nikki Haley going forward? Hot mic with Mick. I don't know how many laughs there'll be. He'll give his take. There might be a few laughs.
A couple laughs.
But hot mic with Mick on the other side of the break when the Hill returns. Stay with us.
No llamas.
No llamas. Watch.
My national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. We're not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Now, the announcement comes as the president is facing a major test tomorrow as Democrats head to the polls in Michigan. Now, he is not facing a serious primary challenge. Rather, a group of liberal Democrats in that state are pushing people to vote, quote unquote, uncommitted as a protest to the president's policies, especially regarding his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. And the state's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is one of the national co-chairs of the president's re-election campaign. She says she is doing everything, Kelly, to rally support for President Biden. How big of a problem is this in the state of Michigan right now for him? You're out on the trail with him.
I am so curious about what's going to happen tomorrow. We've been reporting on this, that folks are looking to check off uncommitted on this ballot on Tuesday. This is a battleground state. This is somewhere where Trump could really take this. And I think, you know, especially when the comments come out where he's saying a ceasefire deal may be close, that's exactly what those supporters there in Michigan, Arab Americans, want to hear.
A week away.
But
he felt compelled to say it the day before. I mean, and to be fair to him, there have been some reports on the matter, but he came out here the day before the primary. You worried about this? Part of the thing here is in 2016, as Chris knows, 10,000 votes, a little less than 10,000 votes separated. So they're trying to get 10,000 uncommitted votes against the president to send him a message that this could lose in Michigan.
Message received.
Okay.
Lots of Democrats, lots of union workers there. If they get 10,000 votes, it's not going to make a difference because Biden's the only one on the ballot. And between now and November, we're going to make peace with the Arab Democrats or Arab American Democrats. They can send the message, but those aren't enough votes to make a difference, even in Michigan between now and November. And between the peace that we're going to make with them and the fact that they're going to have one choice, Trump or Biden, we're going to win Michigan.
No matter what happens tomorrow, the question is, will they come home in November?
Or will they even turn out?
Right.
Or they even turn out. Now, the magic number that you're looking for tomorrow.
Okay.
15%.
Okay.
So they say that their goal is 10%. But delegate rules say that if they hit 15%, then they get a delegate. And if they can manage to achieve one delegate at 15% of the vote and are viable, that creates some weird momentum. And now there's a free radical on the floor at the Democratic convention, and it gets more interesting.
All right, time now.
Free radical at the convention. Double entendre, yes.
Time now for Hot Mic with Nick. Mulvaney gives us a peek behind the scenes, tells us what he's hearing. Nikki Haley staying in the race after really let's sort of be real here, no race at all going forward. Why is she staying in it? What's the thought there? What are you hearing?
I'll start off with something you don't expect me to say. I don't know.
Okay.
Here's what I do know. I do not expect her to be the no labels candidate at all.
No,
keep in mind, she is a conservative Tea Party governor, fiscal conservative, pro-life, neoconservative on foreign policy. She is not what No Labels has said they've wanted from the very beginning, a compromise ticket, a unity ticket, a down-the-middle ticket. She's about as compromised as I am. I just don't see her going as the third party.
Headline, No Labels director says Nikki Haley, quote, somebody we'd definitely be interested in.
Now, let's talk about that, because that's from Joe Cunningham. Okay, Joe Cunningham is a former elected official who's a 1 or 2 time member of Congress from South Carolina down in Charleston. Democrat snuck into a seat that should have been Republican. Republicans were infighting between Katie Arrington and Mark Sanford. He's not a big name and no labels. He's not like Nancy Jacobson or Mark Penn. He's not one of the big names. He's not Joe Lieberman. He's there and he participates, but that's the first person I've heard at No Labels mention Nikki Haley.
Another story I'd like to get your thoughts on. President Biden has invited the top Democrats from the House and the Senate over to the White House tomorrow. This is the big 4, right? The top 2 in the Senate, the top 2 in the House. Biden to meet congressional leaders with shutdown clock ticking. You've been in these meetings?
A couple times. I've seen both sides of a shutdown.
Were you there when Pelosi walked out? Were you there on that one?
Yes, I've been at that one. I've been yes. What do you want to know about shutdowns? Anyway, here's
Republicans get blamed.
That's exactly right. But it doesn't make any difference because it doesn't change any voting patterns. Anyway, here's what you're hearing is that in the past, I've described the shutdown mania as there are people on the Hill who want to shut down. They want to make the point. They want to have that battle. And then you end up not having a shutdown because things tend to fall apart. It's the exact opposite right now. I don't know that many people on the Hill who really are, sort of itching for a shutdown. There's always a couple. But generally speaking, the center of gravity is let's get something done. But the chances of having a shutdown are actually much higher than normal simply because the place is so broken.
What do you put it at?
I think it's above 50% of at least some type of a shutdown. I go back to what happened in 2017. I was the OMB director at the time, learned a great lesson, which is the OMB director is actually the person who shuts down the government. That was a fun day at work. And we had an accidental shutdown because of something that Rand Paul had filed right before midnight on a Friday night. We went a 24-hour shutdown. That's what I feel is going to happen here. There's going to be a couple of days because they just cannot get their act together. I don't think the meeting at the White House changes it because if Mike Johnson wants to keep his job, he's going to go down there talking about border security, not funding the.
What are the odds you think Mike Johnson keeps his job?
50-50. One of the most interesting things I saw on the stage the other night in South Carolina, aside from Woody Johnson, who we can talk about later, big donors coming back to Trump, was the call out to Matt Gaetz and the round of applause he got in South Carolina. Matt Gaetz is famous now because of what he did to Kevin McCarthy, and there's going to be at least half a dozen other members of that body, and they're going, you know what? I want to be as famous as Matt Gaetz. How do I get rid of Mike Johnson?
He's famous for a couple of others.
I was there in the room on Saturday night, and it was interesting because Lindsey Graham, boo, and Trump tried to contain that a little bit and couldn't because
it's Lindsey Graham,
and you can't stop people in South Carolina from booing Lindsey Graham. Right. But Matt Gaetz, it was like this might be a bad analogy, but there were like the claps and the applause, and it didn't stop, and there were more, and it was like trying to cheer the band on, right? When you're like at the concert and watching the band and you want them to keep going. He had that reception there kind of stunned me a little.
Why? You were there in the room. You were in the zone.
Yeah, because they wanted it to. It just kept going. It was like the enthusiasm for Matt Gaetz kept going, kept building.
Here's what Trump is doing in those things. Of course, he's always going to check the boxes for the local people. That's ordinary course of business with Trump. He does it every single place that he goes. But when he goes to those other people, he's measuring. He's trying to see how those folks are received. That's why he mentioned Ronna McDaniel. He mentioned Matt Gaetz. He mentioned a couple other folks who weren't connected to South Carolina. He wants to see how the crowd reacts to them.
Interesting.
But how do they get it done with Mike Johnson being in the predicament that he's in? You put it at 50-50. I don't think you can serve two masters. He's walking in living conflict. And if he doesn't get this deal done, they shut the government down, or they do get it done and he loses his job. How can you have a fair negotiation and put the government first if he's in that position?
The answer is a discharge petition. The problem is that takes about 9 legislative days, or in the real world, about 3 weeks. So
does Johnson keep his job even under that scenario?
Probably under a discharge petition. Yes, it was always we always used to worry that Boehner would use this as an excuse to avoid responsibility for actually cutting a deal. My guess is that sentiment is probably held by other folks on the Hill right now.
Before we go to break, did you see this? Show it on the screen.
Are we seeing Malay?
No, that's not Malay. Okay. Winning a day of sailing on the Pacific with RFK Jr. That from Team Kennedy.
Kelly's signing up.
When you see that around the table we go, what do you see? You take him up on that?
No, I don't need a husband.
Oh, gosh.
I definitely have been sailing before. I don't know. Maybe if I could grab an interview while we're on there with
there you go.
There we go. I like the angle.
I've heard on reliable sources that JFK is going to be on sailing with him. And you know what? I'd go.
What's going on here?
PT 109 comes to mind. I don't.
That's worse than what I said.
I don't know, but he was in California talking to the libertarians. He got a pretty chilly reception there, but there is momentum for him nationally. His best chance, and something that Democrats ought to be very much hoping for, is that he can convince the Libertarian Party to give him their ballot access and get him on the ballot all across the country, because that'd be tough for Trump.
And they're showing he's younger, like to the other comparisons.
Talk about
he
damning
could do
with faint
push-ups
praise.
and go sailing and do all
hanging
the
out
things.
on the boat there. All right, coming up. Out of all the bills that our government makes, which one do you think has spiked the most in terms of production in the recent years? I saw the chart over the weekend, and I was dead wrong with my guess. So which one do you think it is? I'll chat with Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, on the other side of the break. Stay with us. The Hill on NewsNation returns.
The Hill Sunday with Chris Starwalt.
Unvarnished, unapologetic insights from the best journalists in Washington and around the country. That's what we have in NewsNation.
Premieres March 3rd at 10 a.m. Eastern on NewsNation.
All right, so before we say goodbye, here's a couple stories that caught our eye. Did you know that the $100 bill is this country's now most common currency? In fact, it has doubled in circulation in the recent years. Right around 2015, it passed the dollar bill. And yet, as the Wall Street Journal reports, the bill is hated by cashiers who struggle to spot a fake or make change for a small purchase, as you might imagine. Second story that we saw, show the full screen, quote, man pleads guilty to insider trading after overhearing wife's work calls. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance. This one is fascinating. The wife worked for BP. Yep. BP was acquiring a company. She works from home. The husband hears the phone calls, makes $1.76 million in trades, and now the SEC says, you know what, you could be going to prison for 5 years.
Maybe call Nancy Pelosi as a character witness. Just made $1 million on her NVIDIA trade. She among some other quite convenient, or shall we say lucky.
She's got about $1.25 million on Palo Alto networks too, I believe, that just came in.